Hey, if your application uses some of the AWS services, then it needs correct IAM permissions. For example, to read and write objects to S3 bucket, your app needs correct policy to do that. There are a couple of ways to create this policy. One way is to just give your application full access to your AWS resources. Don't do that, ever. Another way is to follow the least privilege principle and craft a very tight policy that only allows what needs to be allowed. But how do you create such policy without losing your mind? In this video, we will explore some options. The first way is a native way, via the built-in policy generation. Just go to the IAM role, scroll down to the Generate Policy button, select which time period do you want to analyze, select which cloud trail from which region you want to analyze, create new IAM role that will perform analysis, and submit. Then, after a couple of minutes, and if the S3 bucket with your cloud trail events allows the newly created IAM role to access it, AWS console will offer you a generated policy. You can then adjust this policy with particular resources your application needs to access. There are two problems with the Access Analyzer. First problem is that you need to properly configure CloudTrail and S3 bucket and then still do extra configuration on Access Analyzer side to get the policy. This is not a big deal if your company has these bits and pieces in place, but if you are new to AWS, then the steps I just told you can be very confusing. The second problem is that the generate policy is no good. It does not narrow down the permissions to the resources that your IAM role tried to access, and from our experience, it does not even include some of the permissions in it, probably because the role already has another policy attached. For example, mkdf's background job processing Lambda function accesses SQS every few seconds, and yet Access Analyzer does not even think about suggesting any SQS permissions. Another option is to use some open source tool. Every AWS SDK supports something called client-side monitoring. What that means is that every time your application tries to access AWS APIs, AWS SDK will send some metrics about these requests to a monitoring endpoint of your choice. There's a tiny open source utility called ActionHero that makes use of the client-side monitoring feature. It receives the metrics that AWS SDK sends and then logs API actions. For example, I've added ActionHero as a sidecar to mkdf ECS tasks. Now, when I inspect the logs of the ActionHero container, I can see that my application tries to access SQS. Same as with IAM Access Analyzer, I don't know which particular resources my application tries to access. I only have a list of API actions. But ActionHero is a bit simpler and faster way to obtain the same information, which you can even use on your laptop. To conclude, even though there are some relatively simple ways to automate generation of least privilege IAM policies, it's still a bit of a hassle every time. Another approach could be starting without any policies and just deduct the permissions from access denied errors from AWS APIs. But this also has limitations and neither is particularly convenient. Let us all hope that eventually built-in IAM policy generator will achieve some high level of decency. That's it for this video. If you or your company need AWS consulting or trainings, contact us via the email provided in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and press the like button. Thanks for watching!